Hi everyone, I'm Lauren and welcome back to my channel. This is Light in Lavender, where we talk about all things books and my own writing journey. Today is my November wrap up. I managed to get through a total of 4 books this month, 2 audiobooks and 2 also technically borrowed from my library, but I'll get into them in a little while. I'll do my usual, going from the first book I finished in the month to the last book I finished in the month. November wasn't a great month. I had 4 books actually that I was due to finish in November, but they've kind of like flipped over to the start of December, so December might be a very top heavy month for how many books I finished, but we're getting closer to that 50 book goal for the Goodreads. The first book I finished in the month was an audiobook, and that was White Fragility by DiAngelo. This is a book that I bought back in June or July I think, but I didn't really get into audiobooks until maybe October. I've never really found audiobooks a way for me to be able to take in the medium of books, but in October I noticed a couple of Audible deals and I thought might as well try and get into it, and with my ability to take in the information I thought I'm definitely going to give this one a go now, especially now that I know that I can actually take in the information and give back the information to what I have listened to. I gave this book a 4.5 star rating, although I thought the information in it was really good and quite thought-provoking. Tripping over my words, can you tell? I thought that it was too USA centric for it to be fully taken in by non-US nationalities or peoples. I did voice some concerns, I think it was in my November monthly vlog, where I mentioned that I wasn't sure if I was feeling the results of White Fragility or if it was just from my own personal experience, how I knew that what I would call certain things is not what is clearly happening in America. So the example I used in that was around sketchy neighbourhoods. I grew up on what I would call a very, very sketchy neighbourhood, but it was white. I'm pretty much going to say that there was no other ethnicities there apart from white British Caucasian people. I lived in a very white area in Sheffield and did not mix around a lot with people who were not also white Caucasian people. That being said, the area I grew up in was hella sketchy, and this was more from its socioeconomic level rather than the race of people and the ethnicity of people. But I think part of this, not misunderstanding, but this jarring world is because in America, I believe from what I've seen and also heard from different documentaries, is that lower socioeconomic areas in America do generally tend to be filled more with black people rather than with white people, so I think that's why I had this sort of jarring disconnect with that part of the audiobook. But the reason I had this jarring disconnect was because the author made it out as though every single country in the world would have the same sort of coded language and calling places sketchy areas or not wanting to live there because of the ethnicities and the race of people there, whereas I personally think that's more of a socio-economic thing, where no matter what the ethnicity is or the main race of the country, there's going to be an area where you're probably not going to want to live because it's the more deprived area, there's less funding going there, there's less people of sort of upper middle class levels. So I think that I got the points that she was coming from. I feel that it was also at the same time maybe missing the mark a little bit with some areas. I don't know if my experiences are the same for everyone in the UK, because obviously we've all had different experiences and we grew up in different cities, but for me personally, I would refer to that sort of coded language as socio-economic issues and on the lower end of that, rather than it being an ethnicity issue and then by default also a racist issue. However, even though I don't feel like I agreed with that point, it was interesting for me to be able to then evaluate my own sort of prejudices against the world, because obviously everyone has prejudices, everyone's biased inherently because you've always got your own view and your own thoughts and opinions clouding the judgments that you're making on people, because I love my hands up, I make judgments on people from looking at them. I know you shouldn't, but unfortunately that is just the way that society is. If we didn't have these sort of snap judgments that we make on people from what they look like or the area that we're in or the way someone is behaving or talking, we wouldn't have this entire system that's built up. I don't know if it's a learned sort of behaviour, but I do know that it's something that everyone is guilty of, and to try and admit otherwise is feeding into the narrative that you're a perfect person and there's no such thing. And so I'm more than happy to hold my hands up and say, yeah, I've made split-second decisions and judgments on people, and probably I shouldn't have done. Maybe I should have let them tell their stories to me first before I made these decisions on people, but it's a behaviour that is being overlearned, so like trying to get over that. I do know that now if I do make a judgment around someone, I try not to let that cloud my opinion on them, and I will give them sort of like the opportunity to show themselves for who they actually are, rather than what my snap decision has made of them. So although I felt this book was very US centric and very heavily US focused, I do think that the information within it was quite intriguing and also a really good starting place to evaluate your own opinions and to evaluate your own biases in life, and to see what you can do to try and change the biases that you've got, rather than becoming irrationally angry or upset, trying to evaluate why you feel that way if someone calls you out on something. DiAngelo mentions quite a few times that she's been invited to different companies to do, I think it was sensitivity training, something along sensitivity training, but I think it was specifically racism. So they'd get people into the training room and go through the different information that was being spoken about. But over the course of these sessions, people were actually called out on their racism, but then rather than the focus being on the fact that this person has made a racist comment, the focus is then on the white person being upset that they have been called out on it. And a lot of this book is about trying to not undermine, what is the word? Trying to remove the stigma around the word racist and racist language, and rather than it being a binary of good and bad, it's a everyone's a little bit racist, you just have to work to change that. Overall, I'm really glad that I picked this book up and I got it back in June. I kind of wish I'd listened to it before, but I don't think I was in a good mindset to be doing audiobook listening to stuff. I know that I listened to Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People about race, and I did struggle to retain the information, but I have been listening to a lot of podcasts recently, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to get into this book a lot more. The second book that I read this month was Mortal Engines by Reeves. I wanted to pick this book up after watching the film. I think it came out at the start of 2020 or towards the end of 2019. I can't remember. This year has been 79 million years. I really liked the overall premise in the film, so I wanted to pick up the books as soon as I found out that it was based on a set of books. I had seen a video with someone doing a review saying that they disliked this book and wouldn't be continuing the series, and I tried to not let that cloud my own opinions on it and try and still go in with like a fresh slate of I enjoyed the film, I liked the underlying ideas around it, but I need to see what the source material was. Again, I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good middle grade book. I loved the concept behind it, that the world has gone post-nuclear, they've lost all the information, and now cities are running around on big sort of like traction things, which I can only imagine are kind of like army tank traction pads. I don't know. I love the idea that history had been lost to them, so they were looking for the old technology of the ancestors, things like computers and USBs, and that everything has moved to a more analog style of life. So even though they've got these giant traction cities running around stealing little cities and breaking them down to get parts and fuel and food, that they have no way of like using mobile phones, or computers are gone. And I just love the idea that humanity as a whole went so far with sort of nuclear warfare that they wiped everything out and people had to start again in a way, and that only small bits of technology remained. So for this sort of dystopian setting, I really enjoyed it. I did question why they made some changes from the book to the film, especially as part of the book points were integral to the character's personality, and it did seem a little bit off that they'd changed this for the film. But I'm glad that I read the book, and I can't wait to read the next 3 in the series. The next book I read in November was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. I don't know why I picked this up. I think this was on Audible and it was one of the offers, so they had a 2-for-1 offer, and my other half likes to get a lot of economic, political sort of documentary type books, and I was just scanning through the fantasy section and I'd seen this. I think I'd seen To Kill a Kingdom pop up in one of my fairy loot boxes, and because I recognised the name I was like, oh, I'll give that a go, and honestly I'm so glad I did. It was a 5-star rating for me. I think it's potentially the best book I have consumed all year, which I did not think would happen in November. I am amazed at how much I loved it. I don't know if part of it is because I loved the narrators for the audiobook. So we had 2 different narrators, and honestly their voices pulled me in. They were able to speak the prose so intently that it was almost as if I was listening to someone's internal dialogue a lot of the time, and I just felt like I was experiencing the journey with them. To Kill a Kingdom is a Little Mermaid retelling, as in the actual Disney Little Mermaid retelling rather than Hans Christian Andersen. But there's a twist, so instead of Lyra, who is the mermaid character, being madly in love with the prince, she's trying to kill him, and I loved that sort of dynamic. I've seen a lot of criticism for this in the sense of I think it was like insta-love or there wasn't enough build-up, but for me I thought that it was a beautifully well done enemies to lovers style book, and the building of the romance and the relationship was done wonderfully. A lot of people had issues with the little quips and the banter within the book, but I think from consuming it as an audiobook and listening to it, you were able to get the inflection and the sort of intonation that was intended behind the lines, and sometimes I think just reading the text you can fall flat on where the intonation is supposed to be, and that in itself can just ruin a narrative completely. So I don't know if I would have enjoyed this book as much as if I'd have read it myself, but listening to the audiobook has honestly made this one of the best books that I've heard. I was trying to listen to this at any moment. I just wanted to get to the ending. I know that if this was a book that I'd had in my hands, I'd have read the last page because I needed to know what was happening, and I was just so enthralled and consumed, and it's a really good book, and I'm so glad that I picked it up, and I would really recommend everyone to go read it. The last book that I read in November was The Dawn Chorus by Samantha Shannon. I think this is technically book 3.5 or 4.5. It's in between The Song Rising and The Mask Falling of the Bone Season series. I can't remember how many books there are. So this follows on from the ending of The Song Rising but before The Mask Falling starts. It doesn't have a lot of integral plot points, so if you don't want to read this but still want to read the series, you don't need to. It's more about the character development and the emotional turmoil that the characters have been through within the plot of The Song Rising. It was a really short read. I borrowed this from my library's ebook service. This book can only be read in ebook form, so if you did want to read it, you are going to have to find a sort of e-reader to be able to read this one. I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 because although I liked the build-up of the character relationships in this, I felt like, I don't know, it was a good read, and I'm looking forward to the next one still. I don't know, I feel like because it was so small, there wasn't a lot within it. I did like the fact that it was portraying sort of like a realistic response to trauma and PTSD style symptoms, so I'm really glad that I picked it up and read it for that reason. But overall I don't think it's any better than any of the other books in the series, so I've given it a 3.75. So those are all the books that I actually got around to reading in November. I have just finished reading one of the ones that I'd started in November, so that's gone into my December wrap up. I have already done my TBR, but there's also a couple of extra books that I need to get read in December. Mainly the 4 that I'd already started, and I've just realised that I've got loads of library books that I've taken out on my electronic app that I need to get through, so I'm probably going to have to read around 10 books at least this month, and I'm a little worried for it. Let me know what books you read in November, and if there were any that you really liked, and if there were any that you really disliked. I think I had a really good reading month actually. Nothing was less than 3.5 stars, and most of them were almost 5, so not a bad month for me. But I am looking forward to December. Hopefully it'll be another good month and it won't be full of really bad books. I like to pride myself on the fact that I refuse to pick up a book if I don't really know anything about it, so I don't tend to read things I dislike, which I guess is good, but I never really branch out a lot. So let me know what you've been reading and maybe I will use it as inspiration to find things and branch out a little bit more from my own reading tastes. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a like and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. I am currently doing Vlogmas, so there is a video every single day in December. I've been starting from the 27th or the 28th of November. Whatever it is, it works out to 35 videos at the end of the year, which is just a huge number of videos to edit and film, but I'm doing it for you guys so you've got more content from me, and also it means I can chuck some things in that I wanted to do but didn't really fit in with BookTube. I hope you're all well and you're all staying safe, and until next time, bye!